WFAE News.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Many industries were hurt by the pandemic as life as we knew it ground to a halt. But among the most impacted may have been the entertainment industry because it employs so many people, many different kinds of people, and because it involves individuals and organizations of all sizes, from major movie studios and theater operators to rock concert promoters and venues and musicians, along with the $15 billion impact of Broadway to smaller venues and arts organizations and individual performers, which even in good times operate on a shoestring and are often one unsuccessful production away from oblivion. So we were curious how those organizations made it through. Some didn't. But for those that did, what has the recovery been like? How have these various entertainment organizations and individuals had to adapt? And will any of this ever return to what we think about as normal? Joining us to explore that is Jeff London. He's a freelance arts reporter for NPR, a producer of more than a dozen documentaries on musical theater, and an award-winning musical theater composer currently working on an adaptation of Swift as Desire, based on a novel by the author of Like Water for Chocolate. Jeff, thank you for being here.
It's nice to be here, Mike.
Actually, Jeff's in New York, so he's here, but here's a different place. Sean O'Connell is a film and entertainment journalist, member of the board of directors of the Film Critics Association, and managing editor of CinemaBlend.com. Welcome back. Good to see you again.
It's always good to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And Tom Gabbard is CEO of Blumenthal Performing Arts, which manages 6 theaters in Charlotte, bringing a wide variety of performers and entertainment offerings to town, including the Broadway tours. He's also a member of the Board of Governors of the Broadway League and a Tony Award voter. Tom, thank you for joining us. Welcome back.
Good morning. Great to be here.
And he joins us, by the way, from the Stage Door Theater, for those of you not watching us on Facebook. It's a nice room. We all know that the pandemic shut down everything everywhere. Locally, Tom, you are the biggest presenter of everything, bringing shows, big names, smaller, lesser known names to town, and you are part of the New York theatrical scene as well. How deep did pockets have to be to survive the last 2 years?
Well, very deep, particularly if people tried to hold on to their staffs. And we actually held on to all of our full-time people until September 2020, and then had to have some pretty massive layoffs. So it has hurt because our industry is not one that can easily pivot. You know, you hear other industries, restaurants that pivot to online sales and all of that. Live performance is about bringing people together. And so a lot of people were put out of work, unfortunately.
Couldn't figure out how to do it takeout. I take it.
No, and online, you know, is just, in our industry, it's just not the same. We love being shoulder to shoulder with people to enjoy a great show.
Yeah, online is called television, and you have to have it lit for TV, and you have to have multiple cameras. A Zoom camera isn't going to cut it on a Broadway musical. On Broadway, Jeff, theaters shuttered for almost 2 years and then began to reopen before Omicron struck. And now we're seeing that some of these shows close for a period of time because the cast or the crew gets sick, and some of them actually just throw in the towel because they just can't keep this up. You reported that last week, I think it was last week, roughly 2/3 of the seats were filled in most Broadway shows, and the lines at the half-price TKTS ticket booth in Times Square were short, which is unusual. Are audiences slim because tourism in New York City is down during the pandemic and the remnants of the pandemic? Or is it that people are a little skittish about coming back to the theater?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, Broadway in its best time usually has about 65% tourists filling seats. And January and February are always difficult times for Broadway. And you often find that shows close, or, you know, they stock up during the Christmas holidays. People come and see shows, and they have a lot so that they can get through those 2 months. But as we discovered, Omicron hit really hard. And so a lot of shows were on hiatus during Christmas, and there's just absolutely nothing in terms of insurance to keep paying for shows, so they just lose the money entirely. So, what's going on now is that people aren't buying tickets in advance. It might be actually better in Charlotte, but and also we have fewer tourists in New York. So, with the exception of, say, Hamilton or the new musical Six or Wicked, uh, basically every other big show is offering half price tickets at the ticket booth.
Tom
So,
has a
yeah.
Tom has a pretty healthy season ticket subscriber base, which I think did it maintain itself during the pandemic, Tom?
It did. We lost about 5%, which is a number we'd expect over that period of time anyway, because people move, their life circumstances. So separate and apart from COVID, over a year and a half time, we would expect to see, people who, would need a refund of their season ticket. So we held on to people, and I think Jeff is right. We are in a better position than New York because we are not relying on tourism, and those season ticket
Right.
fans are an incredible base that we value and really does distinguish us from the challenge they have in New York.
Sean O'Connell is here. He's a movie critic. He's been on this program many times. When did the movie theaters begin to reopen, and what has been their experience in terms of audiences returning to seats?
It was gradual because they're reliant on product, and the studios kept punting big titles down the road even further because they wanted more bang for their buck when they were finally able to screen in theaters. And the local chains and even the national chains were at the mercy of when are we going to get a movie that everybody wants to come see. And even when we program something in, are people actually going to come to see it? Every aspect of our industry changed drastically because there were major studios that experimented with their streaming services, Warner Brothers being one of them, that allowed movies that went to the theater to go to streaming on the same day. It used to be a large window that separated when you could see something at home. And for a year, they allowed huge titles like the Dune adaptation or the most recent Matrix to come to HBO Max at the same time that it was in theaters. So audiences got really used to just saying, "Oh, I'm just going to watch it at home on my probably big TV." And then we turned into 2022, Mike, and the theaters were and the studios were all in accord of we're opening because Spider-Man sort of dominated at the theater and served as the test case that people are ready to go back. But then Omicron, scared a few of the studios, and they once again moved a few titles further down the road, and we just got skittish. Now, it's daunting to move a release date because it affects the entire slate that's coming behind it. So it's not an easy decision to make. There are some movies that we're waiting for that we've been waiting almost a year and a half, 2 years. They've been finished. The studios just don't see a window that's really viable for them to drop it into because of the amount of competition that's now waiting for them the moment that they put something out on a given weekend.
So how long do you think it'll take for the movie industry to find equilibrium?
It could happen relatively quickly because of the amount of films that are sort of ready to be backfilled. If by the end of this year, everybody decided we're full bore, we're going back into it, you would have something major ready to open from all of the studios every single weekend. Whether the people are ready to come back, that's another question. Spider-Man might have proved that they are, but there have been plenty of other films, whether it be Spielberg's West Side Story or a lot of the awards contenders that didn't make a splash at all. There was no ripple. And so, that's where we talked about before going on here, the audience that is going to theaters, and it tends to skew younger. And it tends to skew towards those recognizable IPs and the franchises that people have supported. That's why there's another Scream in theaters right now, because we love familiarity and horror tends to draw younger audiences.
So, Tom, I think the live performance started coming back in Charlotte, at least at your theaters in June. And then you've had, I think, 3 or 4 Broadway tours come through here since June. I know your subscription series is fairly healthy. You lost 5%, but what about individual ticket sales? Is that on par with what it used to be, or has that declined as well?
Things are running hot and cold, and that's the case for us. It's the case in New York, and as was suggested, the familiar titles, particularly the things that have some kind of uplift, those have a stronger draw. If it's a lesser known show, be it theatrical, concert, lesser known, particularly if it's more serious, that's a tougher sell right now. So, you know, we see two extremes. We see some things that sell really, really well, very normal, and other things that are perhaps struggling a little more than they did pre-COVID.
Yeah, Jeff mentioned a few seconds ago, Tom, the word insurance and the fact that there is no insurance to cover COVID-related closures of shows on Broadway and probably on tours. You can tell me if that's true or not. And as a producer, what does that mean?
Well, first of all, you know, a lot of us had business interruption insurance pre-COVID, and you can imagine post-COVID, the insurance companies don't like that. And so that has largely gone away. We have been the beneficiaries of an incredible program from the federal government called Shuttered Venue Operating Grant. And that initiative actually began with the small music clubs, places here in Charlotte like the Neighborhood Theater and the Evening Muse. That has provided an incredible blessing to us to help us heal some of the wounds from the past, the losses that we incurred, to replenish some of our reserves that happened. But it also created some risk capital that allowed shows to reopen. You know, even though Broadway is a lot less active than normal, I guarantee you many of those shows that have been playing this fall would never, ever have reopened but for the shuttered venues, period. Broadway would be dark but for the shuttered venues. So, you know, that has been helpful. It's not helpful to everybody, but to a lot of us, it's made a critical difference.
What about individual artists, Jeff? I know you have this NPR gig, but you're also a composer, so I'm sure that you associate with a lot of people in New York theater. How did they individually survive? The venues may have gotten some money from the federal government, did they?
Well, you know, it was very tough for a lot of people, and I know several people who had Broadway gigs, lost them because of the pandemic, and moved out of New York, just because it was too expensive to stay in New York. I know a lot of artists started teaching online. There's sort of the famous story of Robbie Fairchild, who was the star of An American in Paris and was in the movie Cats and was in the New York City Ballet. He opened a flower shop. You know, people had to find other ways to make money. Obviously, people were on unemployment, but it was a very difficult time. The other thing that I should say is that, you know, when you talk about the theater that, you know, Broadway and off Broadway, you are not just talking about actors or musicians. You're talking about stagehands. You're talking about box office personnel.
Actors, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Scene
one,
painters, scene designers.
right, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I have to stop. Jeff London's an arts reporter for NPR. He's here along with Sean O'Connell from cinemablend.com and Tom Gabbard from the Blumenthal. We're coming right back. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Dr. John Powderly at Carolina Bio-Oncology Institute in Huntersville, a cancer research clinic specializing in cellular immunotherapy clinical trials for patients with metastatic cancer or patients in remission at risk of relapse. CarolinaBioOncology.org. The push to disqualify North Carolina Congressman Madison Cawthorn from office is the topic of the conversation on this program tomorrow. He has made statements that some believe may have incited violence, even insurrection, and suspicions have arisen he may have played a role in the January 6th insurrection. All of that is in possible violation of the 14th Amendment, which would disqualify him. as an elected official. So we look at the merits of the case against Cawthorn and what it might mean for other members of Congress should they prove to be true. That's tomorrow on this program at 9.
Roughly 40,000 students in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools identify as Hispanic. Some Latino parents say advocating for their children is not always easy. I asked for someone who speaks Spanish, and there isn't anyone, so they speak to me in English, and I don't understand. Join us as we talk to parents, teachers, and activists in our 3-part series, Breaking Barriers, Challenges and Opportunities for Latino Students, Tuesday on 90.7 WFAE and WFAE.org.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about survival of the arts and coming out of this pandemic with 3 people who know the arts well. Jeff London is a composer. He's also the arts reporter, one of the arts reporters at NPR. Sean O'Connell is managing editor of cinemablend.com. He deals with film. And Tom Gabbard is CEO of the Blumenthal Performing Arts Center. Jeff just mentioned, Tom, all the people behind the scenes, the people never interact with, audiences never interact with, and have no idea that they even played a role in all this. All they know is what's up there on the stage and what they're hearing coming from the pit. But there are probably more people behind the scenes than there are on the stage when you collect them since the beginning of a production. And Jamie writes on Facebook, in 40 years of working in theater production, this is the longest I've been unemployed in my field. This shutdown caused an unprecedented attrition in the industry, from those choosing to retire early to those switching careers to those experiencing challenges that lead to mental health issues, even suicide. This has caused a gap in the chain of mentors and journeyman production artists. The performing arts and film industries are vital to this state's commerce. Even with local and national touring productions coming back, we are still hanging by a tenuous thread. Is he right? No?
I think he's right, and add to that the restaurants and hotels and folks that rely on business from what we do. That's why, you know, one of the very unique things that we've done that I think is helping us reactivate in a better way here in Charlotte is, because I couldn't get any shows, in June, we opened Immersive Van Gogh and did that in a 100-year-old warehouse. And a big part of that was getting people back to work. I mean, that is totally digital. There's not a live performer, but it got over 200 people back to work. We ended up attracting over 300,000 people who knew that they were going to be arranged in a socially distant manner. So it got them started again, got people back to work, got audiences reacclimated. And so for us, it was an important baby step towards getting back to normal live performance.
What about this idea, Jeff, of losing the chain of mentorship that Jamie mentioned in his email? I mean, that plays a big role in advancing careers. And when you break all that, you're breaking connections that may not be able to be reestablished.
Well, I mean, I think, yes, it's true that some people left the business forever, but we're starting to see a little bit of a return. I mean, I went to see a musical this weekend called Black No More, which is being developed at an off-Broadway theater, and the idea is that if things go well off-Broadway, it will move to Broadway. So I'm starting to see some of that development coming back. But, you know, it was stopped. It was certainly stopped in person. But a lot of people stayed in touch via Zoom. And you know, they're now people are meeting again. Certainly as Omicron is starting to recede. At least in New York.
Sean, let's go back and talk again about the movie producers' decisions to release films either concurrently on screens, in movie theaters and on your television, or just deciding, okay, we'll just put this on Netflix. We're just not going to theatrically release it at all. Can they make money like that? Can actors who make a lot of money on a film make that kind of money if it goes right to streaming?
It's strange because it's the way that they used to get paid, or the pay model that was in effect was due to performance at the box office quite often. A major star would get a piece of the back end, and there were all these other ancillary forms of revenue that came in from DVD streams and such. With streaming, it's all a big mystery. Nobody knows how well things do, and you only hear about things when it's a win, quote unquote, for Netflix or for Amazon. And again, you're taking them at their word. We don't have really specific ways to measure the way that you could with a box office win. So are they making money? I mean, somehow, of course, no one's doing this for free by any way, shape, or form. But these streaming plays are still a way for them to drive up subscriber bases. They still want people to buy into the service and to say, this is the content that's available here. So this is why you should invest, because, we joke a lot about how the cord cutters who did this to save money now probably pay more for the different streaming services that they've all slapped together, because you don't want to miss Yellow Jackets, but you didn't have Showtime, so you're paying for the extra. So that's all a juggle. But when you have the likes of, Tom Hanks is doing movies for Apple TV, and Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand have Tragedy of Macbeth, and it's Apple TV. And, that line that used to separate movie stars from television is gone. It's not blurred, it's gone. So,
the necessity is the mother of invention. And we just went through 2 years of that, no question about it, particularly in the entertainment industry. And we've talked in the past, Sean, about this chicken and the egg thing. Our older adults staying away from movies and sticking to TV because TV is actually better than the movies in some cases, and certainly better than television used to be. And movies have gone to kids' movies like Bang Bang, Shoot 'em Up, explosion things, superhero movies. But when you exacerbate that, when you accelerate that because of the pandemic by releasing things to television, are you creating new habits that will not be broken, that people are not leaving their houses to go sit in a movie theater and have their feet stick to the floor when they can sit in their nice living room with a big 77-inch TV and watch it?
100%. It's an extremely slippery slope that a lot of these studios now face, and only two of them I can think of have the resources to really carry it through, and that's Disney and Warner Brothers. Disney has their Disney Plus streaming service, and Warner Brothers has HBO Max. And moving forward, they can plan to program for those. But that leaves a lot of studios like Sony and Universal, who don't have natural streaming services to pair to it, who they held fast and made sure that their movies went right to theaters. Now, they suffered at the box office because of that, because people didn't want to go out and do it. But the new norm now, and where you talk about not going back to the way things used to be, the new norm is going to be a lot of this stuff going to streaming, because audiences, as you've sort of said, either I'm not that interested in seeing what you're offering to me, or I can wait the month and a half, 2 months before it's going to come to some sort of home video. It's not a pressing need for me to go see the new fill in the blank.
Mike, I will say, I think movie theaters are in a different position from live performance in terms of a reset. People wondered whether or not live performance would go away when radio started. And then when television happened, they said, well, this is the end of live theater. Nothing replaces being shoulder to shoulder with people to hear a story. Cavemen started that, right? Sitting around the campfire and sharing stories. We are wired to need that communal experience. So no matter what the reset is, I continue to believe that there will be a place for us to actually to be together to share a story.
And I just want to build on one thing from that as well, too. Sorry, Mike. I wish that there was the same type of communal audience between the theater, the live theater, and the movie theaters, because etiquette in the movie theaters is gone. And I wish some of it would bleed over from the Blumenthal to the local Regals, because what chases most of the audiences away is the talking and the text messaging and the coming in and out of the show mid thing, and all the distractions that you say, why am I paying for this?
Bring back ushers, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, Tom said something that really struck me, which is shoulder to shoulder. And you can go to a movie and you can be sort of isolated if you go in the middle of the day or whatever. But at the theater, it doesn't make any financial sense for a theater not to be as close to full as possible. And also, in a communal sense, yes, theater or going to a concert, dance concert, whatever, is all about the gathering of people and experiencing something live at the moment that it's happening. So I think that is why live venues were the last to come back. I mean, once the vaccines came in, it was possible for actors and people backstage to gather again in safe ways.
Redbirds on Facebook writes, I'm personally reluctant to go back to in-person events because of higher risk individuals in our circle. Instead of local theater, I now have subscriptions and tickets to live and historical shows from theaters like the Globe in London. They choose one night of their run to broadcast live. Even in a post-COVID world, I'll likely continue to pay for their shows and to subscribe. Please do this. I want to support you. And of course, there's the BroadwayHD.com channel or something. I think that's what it's called. Tom, talk about that, because people have often asked me, why don't they put these things that come to town or even local productions that you guys mount? Why don't you just put that on television? That's a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, it's expensive, and especially to meet the quality standards that all of us have. I think people manage to buck up and do some things online that they would never have wanted to be associated with, as a live performance, because the quality was just not there. It's been nearly impossible for anybody to actually monetize that unless you're, for instance, the National Theatre in London. I have that subscription to the National Theatre. They have a great, wonderful channel. That is really an exception. And they are one of the few people that can actually monetize that, because it is incredibly expensive to do that well.
Dylan.
I want to bring up something anecdotal. Last week, I went to the Regal Stonecrest for a press screening, and I was encouraged as I pulled up to the theater to see a very large crowd out front. And I thought, this is fantastic. At first I thought they were there for a press, like they were going to attend the press screening I was going to, but in fact, they were going to a 7:00 screening of Casablanca. I watched them all pour into the theater and go into that auditorium, and I was going to go see the new Roland Emmerich. I almost wanted to go join them instead. But it was really encouraging and strange to see, people who left their homes to go see something that they very easily could see at home on their own television and going to see it on a big screen. It made me realize I've never seen Casablanca on a big screen. I kind of should take advantage of something like that. So that is an advantage that movie theaters have, of being able to go into their entire archive and just keep theaters humming by putting in old programming.
In movie theaters, the only people we ever interact with are the people in the box office, and even that has gone automated. And then the ticket takers, and that's gone automated. But the only people left now are the people behind the candy counter and the popcorn counter. And I guess the people who clean up the theater after every show. How were they impacted by this? And are the people behind the candy counter now the same people, or do they have to restaff entirely most of these theaters?
Most of them restaff, and they tend to be teenagers. They're
Right.
part-time jobs. But one of the things with people returning back to theaters, because you still want to wear a mask, you're not going to get concessions because you don't want to keep removing your mask to eat your popcorn. So that is still another industry.
Their money, right? That's where they make their
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And that's why those prices have gone up too. If you've gone to take a look at the concession stands lately, the offerings are much better. You can get a crazy decent meal if you wanted to go to the movie theaters, but you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, and it was interesting when Broadway reopened in September. All the concession stands were open, and you were basically told, please keep your mask on at all times unless you're eating or drinking. And I think what happened very quickly was that once Omicron came in, all the concession stands closed, with the exceptions of the ones that sell posters and T-shirts. But nobody is eating and drinking inside of a Broadway theater anymore. And I don't think that's going to happen for a while.
And think for a little while, we were heading towards theaters that specialized in that. Movie theaters that,
Yes.
that you could go and order food in and eat during the entire time. Those were one of the first ones to go away. We've lost the one in the Epicenter, and I believe the one at the Arboretum is still in operation, but who goes to it?
And I know, Tom, that the Blumenthal has had various changing protocols with regard to concessions since performance is resumed in the world of the virus.
Yeah, well, and that's why I want to point out, and this is not, I'm not a Pollyanna here, but I think many of us who have made changes in air filtration and other things in our venues, I think for a lot of people, actually, sitting down in a theater is the safest place they can be. I mean, we have created a very safe environment, and even backstage, where since September we've had daily testing regimes. Everybody is tested. It's a semi-quarantined environment. Being backstage is the safest place for these actors. The problem is when they go home, when they go to the hotel, when they go here or there. But in the case of the Blumenthal, for instance, we turn over the air of the Belt Theater 9 times an hour. The industry standard is 3 times an hour. We turn it over 9 times an hour.
Wow.
So there's a lot that actually I think gives people reason to feel safe if the venue has made those investments to improve those things.
When I went to Ain't Too Proud last week, or I think it was last week, I experienced a first. I didn't hear anybody, not one person, cough during the entire show.
You're a pariah if you do.
That's right, Jeff.
Yeah, I was going to say that, in terms of mask compliance inside Broadway houses, I mean, when the first show opened on Broadway, there was a line around the block where people had to show their vaccination cards. They have really upped their game in terms of checking vaccination status, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody wears a mask inside. And you know what? You can laugh and you can cry behind a mask when you see a show. One thing I think we've all learned in the pandemic is that people can adapt. And that is certainly one way. As an audience member, that's just what the expectation is. And yes, I do feel safer in the theater than I do, say, in a restaurant in New York.
When things began to come back after the pandemic last June or so, some local productions, smaller theaters, Tom, would open and then suddenly they would close because somebody in the cast or crew got the virus, and out of safety, they shut down. And that caused a lot of hardship for theater companies that were already going through an incredible hardship. You've had people, and Broadway has people constantly coming out of these shows because they test positive, but they have understudies. Has it been a big problem? Because local theaters don't have understudies. When your lead is out, that's it. You call it a night.
Yeah, I'd say particularly in December, it was a real problem when Omicron hit. And frankly, it's no different than what you read about with the airline industry, where they cancel a lot of flights because they had trouble staffing them. No different than that. And that's one of the things I think we have really upped our game on in the Broadway business is looking at understudies. Wicked activated somebody to come to New York who hadn't been performing since 2018. She had moved to Chicago to become a software engineer, and they brought her back as an Elphaba standby. So we've gotten smarter about how we organize that.
But did she remember all the words? That's the question. We'll come back and get an answer to that in just a second at Charlotte Talks. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Mint Museum, presenting The World of Anna Sui, highlighting 100 looks that give insight into the fashion designer's inspiration and imagination at Mint Museum Randolph. Tickets at mintmuseum.org. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer announced his retirement last week. The departure of the oldest justice on the bench allows President Joe Biden to make good on his promise to nominate a Black woman to the court. It's a promise he has since reiterated. So coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on 1A, they will talk about what to expect for the road ahead with the confirmation battle and midterms on the horizon. That's all upcoming, and we will continue our conversation about the survival of the arts when we come back in just a couple of seconds. Stay with us.
Hey, it's Mary Louise Kelly. For a while now, it might have felt like the days have been blurring together. But in All Things Considered from NPR News, we don't see it quite that way. Each day brings unique stories, surprising news that won't unfold the same way ever again, events that move history forward. What makes today unlike any other day? Listen to find out. All Things Considered every afternoon.
Weekday afternoons at 4 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're here with one of those all things considered folks, Jeff London, arts reporter for NPR. Sean O'Connell is here. He's managing editor of cinemablend.com, and Tom Gabbard, the CEO of Blumenthal Performing Arts. I want to get the answer to that question. When that Elphaba came back after a 4-year hiatus and having opened their own business, did they remember the words? How does that work?
Oh, there's a huge amount of muscle memory in our business, and so I'm sure she had plenty of rehearsal. But yeah, I'm just proud of that our industry has rallied to figure out a way to keep active.
So Tom mentioned that Blumenthal has done some amazing things with their HVAC systems to refresh the air constantly so that it's the cleanest it can possibly be. Have movie theaters taken similar steps, or are they a different animal?
They did initially. And I like to believe that they still maintain it to a certain extent. In the first few stages of reopening, they were going in and wiping down seats. You saw a system with like a spray that they would go into to sort of clean out the auditorium. But I am sad to report that it feels like it slipped right back to business as usual in terms of how the auditoriums are. Not that I've ever gone into one recently and seen it to be necessarily dirty the way that they used to be, but I don't know if they're going to quite the extremes that Tom is talking about in terms of air filtration and trying to turn it over quickly that way.
We've had a mask mandate in Mecklenburg County for quite a while, and it continues, and that is why audiences are wearing masks at the Blumenthal. But Broadway shows, as Jeff mentioned, also require proof of vaccination or a negative test. We don't do that here. Is that correct?
Several of our tenants, the symphony, the ballet, the opera, they have had a vax requirement. We were very interested in that and would likely have implemented it back in June or July when we thought you could take the mask off once you were in a theater full of vaccinated people. What we learned through Delta was that even with a fully vaccinated group, you still have to wear your mask. It is all about the masking. And that's something that the Koreans taught us. Some of you are aware that I took a very deep dive for the Broadway industry into Korea and big musicals, which continued to play through the pandemic, even before vaccines were available. And at one particular theater we studied where Phantom had been at, Cats, Wicked, not a single case of COVID had come from that theater, from the audience, because everybody masked. Pure and simple, it worked. Vaccines are important, but in terms of that 2 hours when you're sitting shoulder to shoulder, masking is one of the most crucial things we can do.
You are absolutely right. There's no question about it. The science proves that, but not everybody believes it. So I'm curious as to what kind of pushback you have gotten with your mask wearing policy, what the symphony and the ballet have gotten with their mask and proof of vaccination policy here. And Jeff, what's happening in New York as well? What kind of pushback are these theaters and organizations getting? I'll start with you, Tom.
We've gotten a very high level of compliance, at least for Broadway shows and things like that. We don't have the spring break crowd at Blumenthal that is there to party hard, and so I respect that some other genre people may be a little bit different. But we most often hear from people who are upset if they see people, who aren't abiding by the rules. And that's why we have ushers that are going up and down the aisles just to remind somebody if the mask is slipped unintentionally. So we've had a really wonderful level of compliance and people who are just thankful to be back and in what they feel is a safe environment.
Of course, New Yorkers really understand what this virus can do because you were the epicenter of this at the very beginning. And it was tragic and horrible. And but most of the people coming to Broadway, 65%, I think you said, Jeff, are tourists, and they're from all over the world, all over the country. Are they taken aback when they discover, I may have a ticket, but I'm not getting in without my virus vaccination card?
I think in general, people are complying and people understand that. I mean, anytime you buy a ticket, it's made expressly clear. It's rather interesting. Several theaters in New York are now, the Metropolitan Opera, the Public Theater downtown, are asking not just proof of vaccination, but proof of boosting. However, I should say that in some of the family musicals, and I did a story about this, Mrs. Doubtfire has gone on a hiatus. They've actually closed. They are a musical that really appeals to family audiences. And certainly in December, when they were hit with Omicron, but even before and after, bringing families and young kids who haven't had vaccinations created a problem. And they had to turn people away at the door. And that really hurt their business terribly. Even though it was on the ticket, they had gotten the email saying you have to, everybody has to be vaccinated, including junior, et cetera, there were still people who just didn't get the message. So it's not 100%, but they can't get in the theater without the proof of vaccination.
I'm curious about the movies, because the Blumenthal and Broadway theaters have ushers, and in New York, the ushers can be like police. Turn that phone off. Put your mask on. They're not polite about it. They're kind of rude, actually, but they're enforcers. Now, in the movies, as you just said, behavior has deteriorated since the pandemic started, and it was pretty deplorable before that, if you ask me. Is anybody enforcing mask mandates in movie theaters?
Not that I've seen. It's the Wild West.
And are patrons wearing them, or do they just take them off?
I would put it at 50-50. But again, you don't see as many packed houses at the movie theaters as I'm sure that the live theaters are contending with, especially in New York. It is much easier to go to a theater here in Charlotte and maybe have 5 to 10 other people in the auditorium. And because of reserved seating, it is very easy to pick a place before you even get there that isolates from where you are. I have gone to a couple of movie theaters and ended up being so far away from the people that I felt comfortable taking my mask off. But, just to use an anecdote, I did end up getting the Omicron. I've had it the one time, and I'm fairly certain that the time that I got it is because I went to a live concert here in Charlotte that was a proof of vaccination. And I felt safe going into it because everybody had to show their vaccination. And I ended up getting it anyway. So, there's no real guarantees, unfortunately.
When and if Mecklenburg County gets rid of their mask mandate policy for indoor spaces, Tom, will you drop yours at the Blumenthal, or will that be up to the touring shows or the artists that come in and perform? How will that work?
We'll evaluate the circumstances once we get there. And part of this as well is listening to the audience and what they think they need to feel safe. We've been polling people since the middle of May, first every 2 weeks. Now we're doing it every 3 weeks. And so we ask them what kinds of health measures they need to see to feel safe. Masking is one of those things. At the outset, less than 50% told us that they wanted to see masks. Now, and actually for well over a year, it's been like 95%. So we are going to listen to both health officials, but also listen carefully to audiences.
Actors Equity, Jeff, the Professional Actors Union, has been really on top of this since the very beginning, with protocols for the actors and for producers and for venues and for rehearsal spaces. I'm sure that the Musicians Union has something similar, and all the backstage unions have similar protocols about wearing masks while you're back. Until you step foot on the stage, you're in a mask, etc. That's one of the changes. The other changes is that understudies, who are unsung heroes of live theater, have really been put in positions of, well, frightening positions, if you ask me, because some of these people don't get to go on very often, but now they do. And understudies are usually already in the show doing something. So when they go on, somebody has to take over for the understudy. And some of these parts, the way these Broadway musicals are constructed, you have a track and you play several different characters. And you really have to be at the right place at the right time with the right words, the right lyrics, et cetera. And that can be a disaster if you miss. So you wrote about Come From Away on Broadway, and you wrote about The Music Man recently with a situation with understudies. When you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people out at the same time, how does it impact the performances? And is the audiences, are the audiences noticing?
I I actually think that performances with understudies and standbys are sometimes the most exciting performances to watch, because everybody's sort of on notice. You know, their spidey sense is going because everybody needs to make sure that things go right. I mean, that the situation with Come From Away was extraordinary. There are only 12 people in the show, and I think at this one particular performance, there were 8 people who were filling in. Every single female track in the show was covered by either one of the standbys or people who had left the show who had come back, a lot like with Wicked. And then 2 of the men were covered by standbys. There are a lot of rehearsals that go on, but there are many stories on Broadway where people would literally pick up a different track after intermission because somebody would have to leave the show. So, you know, under normal circumstances, the standbys and understudies and swings it's an amazing job, and they do an incredible thing. They rehearse a couple of times a week on stage, but they rarely get to rehearse with the person that they're going to do this scene with. It's just the understudies rehearsal. So it's been incredible to see how people have stepped up.
Talk about, you've written some interesting stories and done some interesting reports on NPR about some of the ways artists survived and shows were done or performances were done. You attended a one-on-one concert, one musician, one attendee, one piece, no applause. You also reported on something called on-site opera and how they chose a performer, and I guess you bought a ticket and they called you on the phone and they sang one aria and that was it. Talk about that.
Well, you know, in the midst of the worst parts of the pandemic, a lot of theater music companies were having to come up with ways of creating content that were not regular. Like On-Site Opera always does something on site, so they are finding some strange place to do a piece. But I have to say, you know, for 10 minutes having some woman on the phone singing a Beethoven to me was kind of wonderful and weird. And the, the thing in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is where I encountered, I had to wait sort of in a waiting space. I was wearing my mask. This was actually pre-vaccination. I was walked through the Navy Yard about 10 minutes, I think, and just taken to a big empty room with a carpet on the floor and a lamp. And I sat down, and then a woman sort of came through a door. She was wearing a mask. She had a viola with her. She nodded to me. I nodded to her, and she started playing Bach. And for 10 minutes, it was just a solo concert, and it was the most mesmerizing beautiful one-on-one experience. It was so intimate and so moving. Um, so that, I can anybody make any money doing that? Probably not. But it was Brooklyn Academy of Music helped sponsor it, and other organizations, and it hired musicians.
Yeah,
And
it sounds wonderful. If only you could make money on it, that would be something I would pay to experience at least once. But that leads me to this: people had to get very creative, organizations, individuals, during this. Have we learned anything? Have we found anything that we should continue doing post-pandemic? Because by gosh, it just works. Tom,
well,
Yeah,
oh,
no,
go.
go ahead.
Tom, okay.
I was
well,
just going to say,
we have 60 seconds. Go.
I think that's key, that we do need to be prepared, that COVID or whatever, there will be other things that come. Let's take what we've learned about things like air filtration, testing, a lot of things, and figure out, a way to ramp those things up when we need to for the next thing that comes. I feel like we're strong for the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that has been interesting, it was an experiment at the end of Lynn Nottage's new play Clydes, the last 2 weeks. There were live streams, and it was professionally videoed
Televised,
live. Yeah, and people bought tickets. The unions made concessions, and having that hybrid might be something for the future to look at.
Got 10 seconds, Sean.
Embrace new mediums, Vimeo, YouTube, TikTok. There's a lot of creative people out there, and they're finding ways to tell their stories.
John O'Connell, managing editor of cinemablend.com. Tom Gabbard, CEO of Blumenthal Performing Arts. Jeff London, arts reporter and composer, not for NPR, but reporter for NPR, composer on his own. Thank you all.
Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support